Welcome back to China Now. This second segment, we have Threshold explaining the lithography technology called SSMS EUV and how it has created a buzz in China. We also have Overlap talking about how China has reached a top level over US infrastructure and how China is focused on internet coverage and more. Likewise, in Thinkers Forum is Carlos Ron, Venezuela's Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs for North America and President of the Simon Bolivar Institute for Peace and Solidarity Among Peoples, talking how is the relationship between China and Venezuela and how China shows a modern type of socialism and more. Let's have a look.
A lithography technology called SSNB EUV has recently created a buzz in China. There are claims that China can build an EUV factory to replace ASML's EUV lithography machines, circumventing US sanctions through an innovative approach. In our previous video, we covered the difficulties of manufacturing advanced lithography machines.
Well, that's going to be the next episode, because we thought it was more important to let you know this first.
For those of you who haven't watched it, EUV system faced many technical hurdles like generating adequate light source power, maintaining optics under high vacuum, and fabricating flawless masks and photoresists. The production of these machines had been monopolized by the Dutch company ASML. Not surprisingly, the limited supply of these desirable tools has become a bottleneck for China's booming microchip industry, especially as US restrictions tighten. To overcome the EUV machine shortage and circumvent the US embargo, China's top minds have been working relentlessly to find solutions. Instead of following ASML's conventional path, they have come up with a different tactic. And that is the SSNB EUV technology we mentioned before. In a groundbreaking paper published by Nature, Tang Chuanxiang and his team from Tsinghua University in Beijing proposed to build an accelerator the size of a football field to power dozens of EUV lithography machines simultaneously. The accelerator is a ring-shaped device in which electrons circulate at high speed in a storage ring using magnetic fields. Electrons are accelerated to high speeds and sent through alternating magnetic fields. This makes them oscillate and emit short wavelength light. The key innovation is grouping the electrons into nanometer, scale bunches first. Within each bunch, the electrons oscillate in sync. These nanobunches are sent one by one through the magnetic fields, and each bunch oscillate together. They emit powerful coherent light at different positions. These high-energy lights can enable advanced nanoscale manufacturing. This combines two key features, the coherent emission from micro-bunching to generate intense light, and the high repetition rate enabled by the storage ring. This enables the SSNB ring to emit powerful, focused beam over a range of wavelengths from terahertz to soft X-rays in a stable, repetitive way. SSNB EUV could have huge potential for high-resolution imaging applications of EUV lithography in chip manufacturing. Public interest is driven from hopes of getting around the US blockade, commercializing Tsinhua's research, and boosting domestic chip manufacturing, which has been further encouraged by Huawei's recent 5G chip self-sufficiency. Currently, ASML's most advanced EUV lithography machines use a 20 kilowatts carbon dioxide laser to strike liquid tin droplets, creating a plasma that emits around 350 watts of 13.5 nanometers EUV light. However, this laser-produced plasma technology is capped at 500 watts, which restricts advances in next-generation lithography. In contrast, SSNB EUV offers several advantages. First, it can accommodate multiple beamlines and produce high average power, driving dozens of lithography machines simultaneously for much higher output. Second, the emitted light is narrow, stable, and precise, which is ideal for imprinting precise patterns on chips. Third, the light output is continuous and consistent, enabling reliable high-volume manufacturing. Fourth, it is a clean source with minimal contaminants that could pollute the chip-making process. And finally, the SSNB principle can potentially be scaled down to even shorter wavelengths in the future, enabling smaller chip features. In essence, the Chinese researchers aim to develop not just a single EUV machine, but an entirely new form of EUV lithography facility for high-volume advanced chip-making manufacturing. Recognizing its importance, China has since invested to construct a scientific facility in Xiong'an dedicated to SSNB research. So, SSNB EUV is scientifically validated and engineering efforts are underway. But obstacles remain. The performance requirements for lithography machines in industrial production are beyond what most people can imagine. There is still a considerable gap from prototype to production-ready system. The LLT EUV approach took over 20 years to go from ideas to implementation, so we are looking at years of work. Nevertheless, under pressure from the US, China is being forced to aggressively pursue creative solutions such as SSNB EUV. With sufficient persistence and resource, breakthroughs may not be so far away. And this could be the game changer if China makes it work.
When Chinese talk about American cities, we focus on special things which can represent some idea, such as the Fifth Avenue representing fancy shopping experience, the Wall Street representing American financial supremacy. We simply just skip the infrastructure level because there is like almost no good news about it. Also because Chinese have already reached the top level in this area. We are not jealous anymore. Like our understanding of infrastructure has reached another level. For example, we care more about internet coverage. We don't want to get disconnected when we step into an elevator. We want to keep in touch on the subway. We are working on increasing the 5G coverage so we can upload information of the whole city onto the cloud, and city planners and city managers can make sure that we are not just having the best infrastructure, but also using them in the most effective way. In fact, every time we watch the news, American politicians say they want to invest in infrastructure. I assume that this matter is supposed to be politically correct in the United States. However, we only see people talking about it. We don't see any action. It is like saying, I love you to your wife every day, but not doing anything beyond that, right? So the truth is, there will be no infrastructure if you just talk about it. I actually wonder why it is so difficult to push for infrastructure in the United States. Some people say the legislative process in the US is way too complicated, and the fight between Democrats and Republicans are too intensive. But when the United States decided to bomb a country or ban China from buying American chips, they made decisions very quickly. They made those decisions which can damage the economic interest of the United States so easily and so quickly. But they have difficulty to make decisions which is good to the country. Like building infrastructure which can bring tons of jobs to the United States and raise people's income. You guys always say that how much you hate Trump, but think about it. If a Democratic administration can actually start a massive infrastructure investment, then it will get the support in the Rust Belt and the red states. Getting a job is what they care the most. So I don't think it's just a matter of legislation being too slow. So can you sum up some reasons for this?
Sure. I mean, it's a very interesting question. It's an infuriating question for many people in the U.S. But sure, I mean, it's broadly popular among people, of many different political backgrounds, ideologies. You would think that if there's anything that the U.S. government would be able to implement, it would be an infrastructure construction program. I mean, it's even good for big businesses too. But there's a major blockage and major inefficiencies on multiple different levels. So if we take the most recent legislative debate over the infrastructure law that the Biden administration was pushing for an example. So in the United States Congress, you need to have a bill pass the House of Representatives and the Senate. But in the Senate, it doesn't require just a majority vote. It actually requires 60 out of 100 votes. So the Biden administration would have actually been able to pass like a much larger, more ambitious, broader infrastructure program. But they have this ridiculous, undemocratic rule stopping them. And there are also members of the Democratic Party, Joe Biden's party, that are opposed to public spending, public investment, almost across the board in general. So there's this sort of hyper-capitalist skepticism towards anything that involves the government making substantial investments. When that can be overcome, there's a lot of bureaucratic complications that come along with actually initiating an infrastructure project. Generally, there's multiple different layers of government that have to agree to it. So, the money might come from the federal government, and then some of it could come from a state government, and then it would need to be facilitated by the local government. Oftentimes, these are presented as quote-unquote public-private partnerships, which means that some of the money comes from the government, some of it comes from private corporations, and generally private corporations can make a lot of money and profit off of these things. So that adds another layer of difficulty, right? Because, you're dealing with all of these different competing government agencies and entities on top of competing private entities and agencies. So it ends up being just this huge mess where, as you pointed out, very frequently there's not actually the completion of these projects, or it takes forever to happen.
Wow, yeah. As you mentioned, the different layers of the government and the conflict between the federal government and the local governments, it reminds me, it is very interesting. So the Department of Defense is, I guess, one of the most centralized institution in American government. And actually, it is the most effective department in the U.S. government.
Oh, that's right. That's right. And, to your point, you notice, right, that, when it comes time to go to war, spend money on the military, sanction other countries, there's never this type of debate. And, there's a saying in U.S. politics stops at the water's edge, meaning that when it comes to issues inside of the United States, okay, we can debate, we can disagree. When it comes to the rest of the world, essentially aggression towards the rest of the world, trying to dominate the rest of the world, once you leave the shores of the United States, the water's edge, then politics stops. Then all of these elite politicians get together and agree and get along very nicely. It's sort of this essential tradition in U.S. politics. Really, really a remarkable thing to observe.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because it's totally the opposite. When it comes to the international affairs, there will be a lot of debate in China. And people will some people are a little bit more hawkish. Some people are more like peace lovers. They will debate about should China to rival the United States? Should China to obey the so-called international rule? But when it goes to all the issues inside of the country, everybody agrees on economic development. We should invest more money on infrastructure or education or healthcare, whatever.
I wanted to ask you a question because in the U.S., one of the key features, I think, of the political system, and this definitely applies to infrastructure, is impunity, is a lack of accountability when you make a mistake, even a very severe mistake that could cause people to get injured or killed. So whenever there's one of these big infrastructure failures, like a bridge collapse in the United States, it's very rare for people to be held accountable who are in senior positions. Maybe somebody who's relatively low ranking could get blamed, but the people who are in charge of the system, and certainly the political leaders, are essentially never held to account for infrastructure failings, or really failings of any type. How does that work in China? I mean, is there that same level of accountability or lack of accountability?
Yeah, well, that's one big difference between the United States and China, I believe. Usually when we have an accident, no matter if it is a road or bridge collapses, the government will definitely set up an investigation team to investigate the cause of the accident and to figure out who is responsible for this. For example, after the collapse of a residential building in Hunan province last year, the local mayor lost his job for it. When an accident occurs, it is supposed to have someone to be held accountable. So I quite wonder how about in the thing in the United States, because we also saw an apartment building falling apart in Florida, right?
Yeah, I mean, so there's if there are investigations, but they're generally very long, very drawn out, and they're designed essentially so that powerful people can avoid accountability, can avoid blame. So there are different regulatory bodies, different safety agencies that will investigate when there's an accident related to, say, transportation, or it could be a criminal proceeding if it's truly egregious. But if you're a wealthy person, if you're a corporation with a lot of resources, you can hire a team of lawyers. You probably have political connections. It's very easy, especially as public attention fades, as these investigations drag out over and over and over, so many months or perhaps even years. It's easy for powerful people to avoid accountability in that way. I think that another feature that's important when it comes to who holds people accountable in the United States when there's these types of serious failures is really the lack of like a political alternative or a way for people to sort of express their displeasure, because it's bipartisan, right? It's both Republican Party politicians and Democratic Party politicians that preside over this collapse of basic infrastructure. I think that's really something that bothers a lot of people in the United States. Albert, I'm interested too in the perception specifically of young people in China about infrastructure. How do young people view the state of infrastructure in the country? Because in the U.S., it's sort of one of the things that youth look to as an example of, wow, things are really getting worse in the U.S. As time goes on, things are getting worse, not better. Our lives are more likely to be worse than our parents, right? Whereas in the past, parents were pretty sure that their kids' lives were going to be better than theirs, right? So the fact that infrastructure is in this sort of decrepit, crumbling state in the U.S., that really hammers home that point to young people in the U.S. But what's public opinion? What are attitudes like among youth in China towards things like public transportation, the state of roads, highways, that type of thing?
You mean the young people's opinion on China's infrastructure or on American infrastructure?
Yeah, on China's infrastructure.
On China's infrastructure. Okay. The thing is that for my generation, I was born in 1991. So when I was born, China was quite relatively underdeveloped. We didn't have very good infrastructure. So I can sense the fast development of infrastructure. I saw the very beginning of the high-speed train from like day one to now we have like one of the best high-speed rail system in the world. So I can feel it, I can sense it, and I can see it. But for the younger generation, they kind of like born to have it. So it is like for them, it is like a normal thing. For them, China is supposed to have the best infrastructure in the world. It is not a question for them if China should develop and should like getting better. What they want is like faster internet. What they want is like bigger, wider, and faster transportation, like more lines underground. So that's pretty much what the Chinese younger generation feel about the Chinese infrastructure. So you can see the difference between the elderly generation and the younger generation. For the elderly generation, as I mentioned, we even have a television program saying that a middle-class man in China were willing to give up his life in the Chinese capital city to move to the United States to chase his American dream. But today, when the younger generation go to like not just the United States, but maybe to Europe or to some other countries, they feel that maybe your roads are not good enough. Maybe your transportation are not convenient enough. Maybe you should do better. They don't think that China should do better. They think that other countries should do better. So you can see the difference.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You know, in the United States, you mentioned internet, because that's actually a big issue in rural parts of the United States as well. There's this, big push to build more high-speed broadband internet access in rural parts of the United States where, you would think basically everyone in the richest country on the planet would have no problem accessing the internet. But that's actually not the case. There's really big inequality between the cities and the rural areas when it comes to quality of infrastructure. And I'm wondering what that divide is like in China too. What are the big differences when it comes to infrastructure construction in the cities versus the countryside? Are there efforts made to overcome that?
China has not given up on rural areas either. The government has built roads in rural areas to ensure that farmers can have a better and easier access to go out and do business. Government have built network-based stations so that farmers can use their cell phones to sell agriculture products directly on the internet through live streaming, reducing the cost of doing business. However, those infrastructures are actually not economically efficient. So if you fully depend on market economy, the private sectors will never invest in these areas. So those developments are paid off by the government for the benefit of the rural population. So I think that is the concern in China.
Well, I think that might be all the time we have. It was very interesting having this conversation with you. I really appreciate this show. And I think these types of conversations are so necessary now when the new Cold War narrative is becoming so entrenched. It's really fascinating, and I really appreciate this type of exchange. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
We have a lot of cooperation, over 500 agreements between the two countries. I think the best word, or the first word that comes to my mind when I think about China, is friend. It's a country that has been friendly to Venezuela ever since I've been a diplomat and have been in this relationship. I think that China has shown that it wants us to experience what China is, or to see China for what it is. And it's something that is important because the achievements that China has made, the experience of building its own socialist model, modern type of socialism, for a country like ours, which is also trying to build its own socialism. Well, it's very inspiring. I think we pay attention to what China does, again, because I think China has shown with the alleviation of poverty and with the advances in technology and in development that has had in the recent years, which has been fast growth. In the last 40 years, China has transformed into a totally different country. So we, of course, see all the recent history of China as something that we need to study, not because we need to imitate or duplicate, because I think China has its own characteristics and its model works for China. And we're not trying to imitate, we're trying to create our own model. What we learn is that other models are possible when we see China with a success. Not the imposition of the one model by the United States, by neoliberal policies and recipes. The idea of Fukuyama, the end of history. There's only one way to do things. Well, China has shown that that's not true. That you could do things and have a lot of positive outcomes, a lot of outcomes that are not measured in necessarily only in economic output, but also in real transformation in people's lives, in humanity. So if you have a model that shows that it has been able to solve the primary concerns of people, then that's something that we want to look at and hope that we can implement something similar with our own characteristics as well. I think China is playing a very important role, constructive role in world politics. We have seen very recent attempts of China at bringing countries together. For example, the recent, because I think that's the role that countries should play in the international community, bring countries together, attempt at peace, find ways to promote dialogue and mutual benefit, rather than feed wars or trying to create polarize the world into my friends, my enemies. That's not the way diplomacy should work. China is, I think, an example of a country that knows how to respect other countries' sovereignty, other countries' self-determination. China is a country that is respectful of international law, which I think is very important. So those type of roles that China is playing, bringing people together, promoting peace, defending international law, I think is the most constructive role that a country can play in international politics, and I think is very positive.
And this was another episode of China Now, a show that opens a window to the present and the future of the Asian giant. Hope you enjoy it. See you next time.